Hi, this is Ali Arango of Little Guy CGI, and today I would like to show you how to animate a run cycle in Blender 2.79. So let's get started. Okay, if this is your first time in Blender, I recommend you go to File, User Preferences, go to Input, and then choose Select with left click. Blender's default select is with right click, and this may confuse you if you're coming from Adobe programs or other 3D programs. Also, while you're in here, click on Add-ons, put a check mark next to 3D View, 3D Navigation. Scroll down. Put a check mark next to Pie Menu, 3D Viewport Pie Menus, as well as Pie Menu, UI Pie Menu Official. Okay, this model that we're going to be using to animate, I will put a link in the description for this video so that you can download this model as well as the rig to work along with this video. Okay, when you come into Blender, currently you are in, when you first come in, you're in object mode, right? Here we are in pose mode. Basically in Blender, you move whole objects around in object mode. You manipulate the vertices, edges, or faces in edit mode. You set up poses and animate armature bones in pose mode. And you can get to those options here. So when I click here, you can see there's pose mode, edit mode, as well as object mode. Currently, you want to be in pose mode. Okay, I want to give credit to who I learned how to do this run cycle for. I've done run cycles before. However, there is a YouTube channel called I Want to Be an Animator. It is excellent. It doesn't focus on Blender specifically. However, the principles that are taught by the instructor are excellent, and that's where I learned how to do this run cycle for. So if you want to look more into this, I recommend you go check out I Want to Be an Animator. It's an excellent YouTube channel. Okay, our run cycle is going to be 23 frames. Basically, what a run cycle is it is when you have a character run and the character animates in a way as such as it looks like the character just continually runs. So that's what we're doing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this button to make our timeline indicator. That's what this green line is. Go back to 0, right? We want the end of this run cycle to be 23 frames. So currently when you see it says end, it says 89 frames. So we're going to click here, and then we're going to enter in 23. So what we can do is roll our mouse wheel to zoom in. I'm holding the middle mouse button to move this to the side as I zoom in. So I'm rolling the middle mouse button in more just so it's easier to work with our timeline here. Okay, what we're going to do now is roll our mouse wheel to zoom back. I'm going to hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. Okay, I've recognized that our legs here are kind of blending in with the background. So what we can do about that is we can click here. We can go to where we see this horizon right here. We'll click here. We'll make this a brighter color. And then what we'll do is this is our properties panel here. If you don't see this, you can press the N key and this will pop up. I'm just going to put a check mark next to world background. I'm now going to press N to take away that properties panel there. Okay, so we're on frame 1 or frame 0. You can move your frames by right-clicking and dragging your timeline indicator or by clicking right here. So, okay, we want to be on frame 0. All right, so I'm going to hold my middle mouse button to rotate the view. And the first thing we need is our first frame. Our first pose, sorry. I'm going to click right here on this lowest bone there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this leg straight forward, right? When you push it forward, you'll see the leg look a little strange. Don't let that get to you. I'm going to left click here on the back leg. I'm going to pull this back like that. Again, don't let that get to you. What we're going to do is we are going to click on our display. We're going to click on right. We're going to right click right here. The reason why I right click right there is because I want there to be a floor for us to be able to use so we can help see easier as we animate. So I right clicked here to put the 3D cursor here because in Blender, wherever the 3D cursor is at is where objects tend to come into Blender at. So currently we're in pose mode. You can see that when you look here. We're going to left click here and then go to object mode. So here in object mode, we came here so that we can bring in a plane right to here. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold shift. While holding shift, we're going to press A. This brings up our add to menu. We're then going to go to mesh and then plane. And I'm going to hold the middle mouse button so you can so I can rotate the view so you can see. So here's a plane right there. So we're going to press S to scale. I left click to lock that in. I'm pressing S to scale again. And now I'm going to go to back to display. I'm going to click right. And I just want this plane to be pretty much like right on the bottom of our character's feet. All right. So this is a decent size for the planes. With that done, we need to click back on our armature to be able to go to back to pose mode. If you don't have an armature clicked on, you won't be able to go into pose mode. So make sure you clicked on your armature and then click here and then left click on pose mode to go back to pose mode. Okay, what's cool about this first pose that we're setting up, this first pose we can actually turn into 3 poses. So this first pose is actually doing the majority of our work for us. And hopefully you'll understand more as we go through this. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. We're going to left click on this waist bone. That's what that is. I'm holding the middle mouse button mainly so I can see these manipulator arrows here. I'm going to take the blue manipulator arrow and push down. Now when I push down, our legs start to bend. This right here looks kind of strange. What I'm going to do is left click on the bottom bone on the foot. I'm just going to push that forward some. I'm going to lift this up some. I pushed the legs out kind of far, so I'm going to bring them back. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this bottom bone for the back foot selected is I'm going to press R to rotate on the X-axis. And what you want is this bone facing almost all the way down and back slightly. I'm going to bring this up some by taking the blue manipulator and moving that up. I'm going to pull this back some. I'm going to click on the bottom bone for our front foot. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X-axis. Push that forward more like that. And now with this front leg going forward and its back leg going back, I'm going to hold shift, click on the back leg. I'm going to hold shift again, click on the waist bone, and I'm actually going to lift this up, not too high in the air, but now I want this off away from this floor plane right here. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to zoom in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click right here on this bone, roll the mouse wheel to zoom back. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X-axis to make the torso lean forward some, like that. With this arm, what I'm going to do is I'm going to left click on the top upper part of the arm. I'm going to press R to rotate on the press R to rotate. I'm going to hold Alt R because I made a mistake. R to rotate on the Z axis. There we go. And I kind of want this arm going forward like Superman. I'm going to left click on the forearm here. I'm going to press R to rotate on the Z axis for that. So the arm is basically curved in front of our character's torso. With this other arm straight out, and by the way, see how this leg is forward? So this leg is forward, so you know you want this arm to be forward on the other side, right? Because this leg is forward, we want this arm to be back. So what we're going to do is with this arm out to the side like this, we're going to click on this forearm like a bone right here. We're going to press R to rotate on the Z axis, bring this in like this. Now what we're going to do is click on the upper bone, press R to rotate on the Y axis. We're going to bring that down to the side. And now with this down to the side, we're going to press R to rotate on the X axis. Like that. Okay, we want to click on our head bone. We're going to press R to rotate on the X axis because we want the head to be looking, the direction that it's going towards. I'm going to click on this front leg, bring this down slightly like that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click right here. I'm going to press R to rotate on the Z axis to give our waist some tilt. And basically what's going on here is, see how this leg is going forward right here? Because this leg is going forward, you want the body twisting into this leg. And that twisting action as a character runs helps the character to run. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to left click here. I'm going to press R to rotate on the Z axis 7 degrees. Then I'm going to left click to lock that in. I'm going to click here on this back foot. I'm going to press R to rotate on the Z axis -7 degrees. And then left click to lock that in. And that just gives a little bit of rotation for the character's feet. I want this character to lean forward more, so I'm going to click the second bone in our torso. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X axis, like that. I'm going to left click on our character's head, press R to rotate on the X axis to make the head look up. Now I'm holding the middle mouse button just to look at the character. I'm going to click here. I'm going to make this leg go back some and up more. I want this to rotate out a little bit more, so I'm going to press R to rotate on the X axis like that. I think we're good for our first pose. So what you want to do is you want to click on these keys right here. So normally when you are animating in Blender, this will be blank. If you click on these keys right here, you can see all of these options available to us. Basically what these options are is, with these options, we can tell Blender to easily, and I say easily because you don't need these options to tell Blender to keyframe a location, a rotation, or scale. This is just a way of making things easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to select Lock Rot. That stands for location, rotation. So basically what we're doing is we're telling Blender, remember whatever we have selected, once we put in a keyframe, which we're not doing now, by the way, not at this second anyway. Once we put in a keyframe, we want you to put that keyframe in for location as well as rotation. So I'm going to left click on Lock Rot, and you can see that right there. Okay, now that we have this pose set up, what we want to do is press A. So when I pressed A, I deselected the one bone I had selected. I'm going to press A again. All of our bones are selected. You can see this because all of our bones are highlighted. So with all of these bones highlighted, before we enter in our keyframe, we're going to go to a mode in Blender that makes things a little bit easier for us to animate, or a little bit easier to manipulate what's going on as far as our animations. When you look here, you see this says default. So when we come into Blender, this is our default view. This is the view that we see. When we click here, there's different basically workspaces for Blender. The workspace that we want is the animation workspace. So we're going to left click here. And now we can see all of these different panels set up specifically to work with animation. Okay, the main concern that we have with this area is going to be right here, which is our dope sheets. I'm going to pull this down. I can hover here and I can readjust the size of these panels, which is very nice. Currently, this is set on the action editor. We don't want that. We want the dope sheet. So we're going to left click here and select dope sheet. Okay, so why did we come here? How does this make things easier for us to animate compared to the regular mode? Right here, basically, if we put the keyframes in, we would have saw the keyframe a line right here, and we'll still see that line. However, with the dope sheet, not only will we see the keyframes come up here, we'll also be able to manipulate those keyframes if we want to. So I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view, and then with all of our bones currently selected, I'm going to press the I key. And when I press that, you can see a yellow line right here. You can also see all of these different yellow dots come up here, and these are basically all of our bones being shown, and it being in Blender showing us that there's keyframes on all of these bones for the location as well as the rotation for this particular pose. Okay, remember when I told you once we did this pose, most of the work was done, or at least a lot of it, and that is true. So we have our keyframe here, right? Now this is a run cycle, so what we're going to do is we're going to right click and drag this all the way to frame 23. And with all of these same bones selected, what we're going to do is press I to put a keyframe in for all of these current bones. So now we have this same pose keyframed on frame 23 as well. And now what we're going to do is still use the same pose again. What we're going to do is we're going to look to these three buttons here. These three buttons make things very easy, particularly when doing run cycles as well as walk cycles. This button right here is a copy pose button. This right here is a paste pose button. This right here is paste the reverse pose as far as a button, right? So what we want to do is this button right here, this first button, we're going to left click. So we copy the pose, right? So now with this pose copied, what we want to do is go to frame 12. So here on frame 12, what we want to do now is go to paste the reverse pose. So we're going to left click. And when we did that, we pasted the reverse pose. So with this reverse pose here now, what we want to do is press I to keyframe this pose. Okay, currently with these three poses, our character will move. However, the run cycle really won't look, really won't look like anything. So what we want to do now is we're going to take advantage that our character does move, right? Because our character does move between the poses, and you'll see as I right-click and drag this timeline indicator, you can see our character animating there. What we want to do is go to frame 3. And by first setting up those three poses, this helps us to animate because our character basically maneuvers itself into where we need it to go for the most part for these poses as we work our way through this run cycle. So I'm going to left click on the bottom bone for this front foot. I'm going to hold Alt. While holding Alt, I'm going to press G, and then I'm going to press R. Holding the Alt button and then pressing G resets the location of your bone. Holding Alt and then pressing R resets the location, holding Alt and R resets the rotation for your bone, right? So with this bone right here on the ground here, what we want to do is left click on our waist bone here. I'm going to hold Shift, and then while holding Shift, I'm going to click on this bone that, this backbone that controls our other leg. I held Shift because when you hold Shift in Blender, that lets you select more than one item at a time. If you don't hold Shift and you click and then click another item, Blender will deselect the one item you were selected on and then select the current item. So with these two bones selected, I have this foot selected because we're about to push down. I want the waist to come down and the foot to come down at the same time. So as I push down with our manipulator, I don't want this to go through the ground. You can see that right there. That's why this plane is useful. So basically what's going on is this down pose basically shows the weight of our character. The heavier the character, the bigger the character, kind of the more you want to have this weight come down here. I'm going to click here and take this forward some like that. I'm going to click here because this is fine now. I don't want this to go through the floor, but I'm going to push down a little more just for the weight. And then if you think of this, if this pose is showing the weight of the run, we can also have our upper body come down. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X-axis and then have our upper body move just slightly forward. So with that done, I'm going to press A to deselect. Then I'm going to press A to select all of our bones. I'm then going to press I. And when I did that, we can see there's a keyframe here now for all of our bones, as well as we can see our keyframes right here as well. Okay, this next pose is kind of interesting. This is something that I had learned uh, from the channel I was telling you about. I want to be an animator. And the instructor on there, what she does is she actually goes to frame 8. So what we're going to do is go to frame 8. So here at frame 8, what we're going to do is we're going to click on this button right here. We're going to copy this pose. Now we're going to hold the right mouse button and go back to frame 5. So here at frame 5, what we're going to do is we're going to not do the copy reverse or paste reverse as we had done. We're going to do just the paste, which is this middle button. So just this middle button, which is just the paste, okay? So we're going to left click on that, and now we can see this pose right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to press I to put a keyframe in for this pose. However, we're not done yet, but we do want to put a keyframe in right now so we don't lose this pose if we move the timeline indicator. Okay, and before we go on, I realize the background is gray. The parents are gray. We changed it to pose mode. So quickly, I'm going to click here. Okay, so that's already set up. I'm just going to click this world background there. So now I'm going to press N to take that away. Okay, so we're going to click on this bone right here. And what we're going to do is hold Alt. While we're holding Alt, we're going to press G. We're then going to, while holding Alt, press R. This pose right here is our push off pose. This is the pose that's going to be basically giving us the energy of our run. We want to have this leg be, look like it's pushing off. So we pull this leg back by using the manipulator to pull this bone. We're going to click on this foot roll bone here. We're going to press R to rotate on the X axis here, like this. Kind of making it look like our character is flexing their calf. We want this leg to be fairly straight, so we're going to click here again and move this back further, like that. I'm going to click here and move this pose up some, like that. I'm also going to click here. I'm going to press R to rotate on the X axis, like this. I'm going to click on our head, press R to rotate on the X axis to keep it looking forward. And I'm just taking a look. Let's try rotating this a little more like that. Okay, so now that we have this pose in here, and I'll rotate the view by holding the middle mouse button so you can, kind of see the pose, from different angles. So now I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm going to press A to select all of our bones, and then I'm going to press I to put in a keyframe. Now we had already put in one keyframe on this frame 5. This is our second keyframe, so we are good for this pose now. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to hold our right mouse button, drag our timeline indicator to frame 10. We're going to go to our copy pose button, left click on that. Now we're going to right click and hold our right mouse button, not right click, we're going to hold the right mouse button down, sorry. We're going to go to frame 8. So we were on frame 10, we copy the pose, now we're on frame 8. So what we're going to do here now is we're going to go to our paste, just paste, not reverse paste. Not paste the reverse pose, just paste, all right? So we are pasting our frame 10 pose onto our frame 8 pose. So I'm just going to left click right here. And then with that, I'm just going to press I to lock the keyframes in for this pose here. Okay, we actually now have our different poses in. So we just have to copy some poses and then paste the reverse poses of those poses. So all of the poses that we need the reverse pose are 13 frames apart from the pose that they need in. So for instance, when we go to pose 3 or frame 3, we're going to copy this pose. Then we're going to go 13 frames forward, right? So we copy the pose. Now we're going to frame 13. And now we're going to click on the paste the reverse pose. So I click here. There's the reverse pose. I'm going to press I to lock the keyframe in. So we took copied the pose from frame 3, and then we pasted the reverse pose to frame. Okay, now all we need to do to complete our run cycle is just copy a few poses and then paste the reverse pose of those poses. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to frame 3. All of the poses that need to be pasted to have the pasted reverse pose on are 13 frames from our original pose. So on frame 3, what we need to do is have our timeline indicator on frame 3, and then click to copy the pose, and then we need to go 13 frames forward to frame 16. So we're going to go to frame 16, and then we're going to left click on the paste the reverse pose button, and then once we did that, we have the reverse pose here. So now we're going to press I to lock that keyframe in. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to frame 5, and then what we're going to do is copy this pose by left clicking on the copy pose button, and then we're going to go to 13 frames forward to frame 18, and then we're going to left click on the post reverse pose button and then press I. Now we're going to go to frame 8. We're going to left click on the copy pose button, and then we're going to go to frame 21, and then we're going to paste the reverse pose and then press I for that to lock the keyframes in for that pose. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is click here, and this just took our timeline indicator back to the beginning of our timeline. Now I'm going to click the play button, which is right here, and now you can see our character going through its run cycle. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to press N to bring up our properties panel. I'm going to look to where we see display, and then where it says only render, I'm going to put a check mark right there. Then I'm going to press N to take away our properties panel. And there is our run cycle. I like how this run cycle looks. This we animated this on our little block-like character. However, the way we did this will work for many different types of characters as far as having them go through their run cycle. I like the fact that as the character travels, there's that little space where the character is in the air, and you can kind of imagine the character traveling through the air. Okay guys, that's it for the tutorial. For all of those of you out there who like the videos on this channel and we share them, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And for those of you who are new to this channel, if you like the videos on this channel and you would like to see more, please subscribe, and thank you for viewing.